Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Wisteria here of course. And we're still on Shropshire folk tales. This one's called Tom Moody. You all knew Tom Moody, the whippering well. The bell just untolling was honest Tom's knell. A more able sportsman ne'er followed a hound through a country well known to him 50 miles round. No hound ever opened with Tom near the wood, but he'd challenge the tone and could tell if it was good. And all with attention would eagerly mark where he cheered up the pack. Hark! To Rockwood, hark, hark! High wind him and cross him. Now, rattler boy, hark! Tom was a small lad, and would never be handsome after the pox left his face pitted and poked. But he was strong in a sinewy way, and he was quick, stubborn and fearless. His eyes were bright, and he had a ready smile, and was always up for a bit of mischief. He was the son of a widow, and had been needed to help make ends meet as soon as he was able to. He was apprenticed to Adams the master, and worked delivering the malt. One day he had delivered 2 sacks of malt, and was on his way home, bareback, on his master's cob. Tom thought there was no one about, and set the cob at a gate. The horse laid its ears back, dug in its heels, and refused to move. So Tom wheeled it around and tried again. He kept trying, but keeping his seat, pushing the cob, he did finally persuade the horse up and over. But someone had been watching. George Forrester, the squire, who happened to be riding that way, saw the first attempt, and his interest piqued. He stayed until he saw the gate cleared. The squire was a man who loved horses and lived for the hunt. When he saw Tom, he saw a lad after his own heart. The squire made a few inquiries, and when he found out who the lad was, asked Adams, the master, if he would part with him. Well, the master didn't mind, but when Tom's mother found her lad was wanted up at Willie Hall, she was terrified of what he might have done. She knew all too well the high-spirited pranks her son was capable of. When she discovered that Tom was not in trouble at all, but instead had been offered a job by the squire himself, she was delighted. Tom couldn't believe his luck. As the squire's stable lad, his role was to care for the horses and ride out on errands. Tom worked hard, and he had a knack with the horses. He had plenty of fun too. When his natural inclination for mischief led him astray, the squire did not punish him, but simply laughed and ruffled his hair. Tom didn't need a great deal of encouragement to push the boundaries. Tom grew from a boy into a young man, his skill as a rider growing all the time, and he showed it off at every opportunity. With the squire's backing and such beautiful horses available, he would take risks that no one else would even think or dare. Tom's jobs included driving the squire's buff-coloured chaise, to take company home from the hall, and collecting visitors too, from Chifnell, the nearest coaching post. He was always considerate with passengers, but once the gig was empty, it was a different story. One time, he was on the Pike Road, and he was heading toward Chifnell at breakneck speed to catch the coach. The pikeman was slow and did not come open the gate. Tom rode at a gallop to the gate, and the horse reared to a halt in front of it. He stood waiting with his horse fidgeting until eventually the pikeman appeared, and Tom, now livid, gave the man a piece of his mind. The pikeman said nothing, but he didn't hurry his step as he walked to the gate. When the gate was finally open, Tom was away at a gallop, leaving the man choking in a cloud of dust. Tom determined that he would not wait on the man the next time he headed that way. There were no words between them as Tom sedately brought his passengers back through the gate. But the next time the gig was empty, he urged the horse on as the gate loomed ahead of them. The pikeman watched his coming, making no effort to speed his step. Tom did not slow down, but instead whipped the horse on. As he came to the gate, he urged the horse over, pulling the gig smoothly behind, barely losing rhythm as he came down on the far side and disappeared into the distance without paying his fee. Tom tried the same trick the next time, but it didn't go quite so well. The horse sailed over, but one wheel of the gig caught on the top rail, flipping the gig and sending Tom up into the air, landing hard on his backside. The pikeman burst out laughing, and could only keep standing by clinging on to the gate. "You know, I reckon that just about served you right," he observed, wiping his eyes. "You know, I think you might just be right," replied Tom with a grin. Tom lay flat on his back and laughed almost as hard as the pikeman, until in the end, the pikeman walked over to Tom, held out his hand and hauled him to his feet. From that day, the two were firm friends. It didn't stop Tom from jumping over the gate now and then, though, just for the sake of it. The stables at Willie revolved around the hunt, and as the days shortened, the excitement would build. The season looming, of course, closer and closer, as it always would and always did. The only way a boy like Tom ever got to hunt was by working in a stable such as George Forrester's. At first he was only allowed on the sidelines, grooming the horses beforehand, cleaning them up afterwards, and meeting the hunt with fresh horses. The squire knew how much Tom longed to join the hunt, and also what a good horseman he was. It wasn't long before Tom's skills were harness. Squire Forrester gave him his pinks and made him whipper in his job, being to keep the pack together and prevent the hounds from getting distracted by other scents. Tom loved it. He made such a good whipper in that he became famous throughout the county and eventually beyond. A whipper-in is only an assistant to the master of the hunt and rarely becomes known much outside his own hunt. Tom's fame spread for 3 reasons. The first was that he was superb at his job. It was said no one could keep a pack together, sustain the burst of a long chase, and being at the death with every hound with him, not like Tom could. The second was the way he rode. He had a horse that no one else would go near, an animal that was all teeth and hooves to anyone except him. But when Tom sat on him, the two would fly over wall, fence, ditch, brook or hedge. The higher and wider, the better. The horse was huge. Tom was slight. When the two of them saw open country in front of them, they would go from morning until night and think nothing of it. The third reason was Tom's voice. Tom had a rich, clear, mellow tone that carried across acres. His "hello" to the hounds, his "tally-ho" or his "whoop, whoop, whoop" was so clear and melodic that they were often requested as a party piece in the pub, not just used in the field. One day, Tom was recounting his adventures of the day's hunt in the servants' hall. He was in particularly fine voice and gave his whoop, whoop, whoop. A moment later, the housekeeper came bustling in and said, La Tom, you have given the whoop, as you call it, so very loud and strong today, that you have set the cups and saucers a-dancing, I tell thee. One of the squire's guests, who had purposely placed himself within the hearing to listen, replied, "I'm not at all surprised. His voice is music itself. I never heard anything so attractive and inspiring before in the whole course of my life. Its tones are fine and mellow, a French horn." Tom's voice saved his life at least once. He fell down an old pit shaft. The sides gave way and he was trapped with no way to get out. Tom gave his "Hallo" to the hounds. It reverberated out of the shaft mouth and carried over the fields until at last it was heard. Once it was established that it was not some ghostly emanation making the racket, but in fact Tom, he was eventually extricated. On a day's hunting, there were usually 3 kindred spirits to be found on the heels of the hounds: the squire himself, Phoebe Higgs, one of his mistresses, and Tom Moody. Phoebe was an adventurous one, and maybe as much as the 2 men, or more so. She and her horse would take a death-defying leap, then smile sweetly at the squire from the other side, daring him to follow her. The squire had a clear field from the Clee Hills all the way to Wrecking. Once they chased a fox to the top of the Wrecking, and it fled through the needle's eye, leading the hounds behind it. They regularly went further still and hunted along River Severn, from source to sea. When there wasn't enough hours in the day, they hunted by moonlight instead. Tom stayed small but strong. He always had a twinkle in his eye and was game for anything. His good humour made him a favourite of the hunt. He earned a good living from the squire and got plenty of tips on top, not to mention money from the bets. It was rare that Tom would ever turn down a bet. No matter how crazy, he would find a way to do it. There were plenty of women who had a soft spot for Tom, but, like the squire, he never settled to just one woman, and he never married. It was sad the day the squire gave up hunting, for none more than Tom. Tom was a good deal younger, and the squire, he was a man born to hunt. His heart near broke as the shire's best steeds were sold off. Tom was kept on, together with his favourite foxhound, old Trojan. But Willie Hall was a different place. Tom had always liked a drink, and now he had a good deal more time to spend on his hands. He spent more and more time down at the Hangster's Gate, with his group of old cronies: Scale the schoolmaster, Crump the butcher, and old Eamon the parson. The little inn was on the coach road between Bridgnorth and Wenlock. Tom's fame grew, and over time became a tourist attraction, people asking to stop there to see him and hear his famous hunting cries. Tom helped put the inn on the map, and the people who stopped always chalked up a few drinks on the board for good old Tom. Tom used to boast that his constitution was as sound as a roach, but at the last he felt himself beginning to fail and asked to see his master. "What is it, Tom?" asked the squire. And Tom replied, "My run is almost done, and I'll be going to earth soon. When I am dead, I wish to be buried at the barrow, under the yew tree, if I might, please. In the churchyard there. Yes, I wish to be carried to the grave by 6 earth stoppers. I wish for my horse, Old Soul, to follow me with my whip, boots, spurs, and cap slung on the saddle, and the brush of the last fox when I was up at the death at the side of Forelock. After my horse, I want 2 couple of old hounds to follow me to the grave as mourners. When I'm laid in the grave, let 3 halloos be given over me, and then, if I don't lift my head, you may fairly conclude that Tom Moody is indeed dead. Tom died not long after, with the squire at his side, having managed to sip one last toast to the hunt and his own master. All was done as he asked. 3 rattling halloos sounded loud and clear over his grave. The crowd gathered and held peace as the halloos faded away and the grave stayed silent. But though Tom was gone, he was not forgotten. The well-known songwriter, Dibdin, had stayed with Squire Forrester and got to know Tom. When Tom died, he wrote a song in memory of him. Charles Incledon, the human voice divine, was regularly filling Drury Lane Theatre, and when the song came on, or out, he was one of the first to sing it. Squire Forrester and some of his hunt made up a party to go to London to hear it. They took up their positions in the pit. Sitting forward on their seats as the singer began the song, they were impressed enough with the verses. But his tally-ho was sadly lacking. Charles Incledon was rather taken aback when the members of Willie Hunt leapt up onto the stage and joined in the chorus to show how it would be done. Back in Shropshire, though he did not rise from his grave on burial day, Tom didn't lie quiet. He couldn't bear to leave the hunt. On fine days when the air was crisp, the hounds in full cry, and the hunt sounding tally-ho, a fine melodious voice would sometimes mingle in with the call. At dawn, before the night was truly gone, Tom's shade would be seen in the early morning, in that mist that forms, fading with the sun. These days, however, it is said Tom's ghost is rarely ever seen. He was a man of his time. The winds have changed and his days are gone. And yet, though the hunt rides to a different scent, when the baying of the hounds resounds across the land, sometimes an extra rider was often seen following the hunt. Thus Tom spoke his friends, ere he gave us his breath. Since I see your resolve to be in at the death, one favour bestow, 'tis the last I shall crave. Give a rattling view, hollow thrice over my grave, and, unless at that warning I lift up my head, my boys, you may fairly conclude I am dead. Honest Tom was obeyed, and the shout rent the sky, for every voice joined in the tally-ho cry. Tally-ho, hark forwards, tally-ho, tally-ho. The end. It's a really cool story, guys, and a nice story. Such a shame because he must have died young when you think about it. He's got to have been fairly young, but please hit the like. It's free. It doesn't cost anything and I'd really appreciate it. Share if you can. That does help also. And if you're not yet subscribed, please do so. Thank you for listening. And I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Many blessings.